My guest today is Jennifer Stevens. Jennifer is the founder and CEO of JHL Company based here in Austin, Texas. JHL is in their 20th year in business this year. We talk a lot about their sort of marquee event they do every year called Mac Jack McConaughey that benefits children's charities. We talk about what led her to start a company in the first place. We talked about living in the tension between family responsibilities and business responsibilities. We talk about what makes Jennifer optimistic in a world full of pessimism. We talk about what it takes to make the decision to get off the ride when that time comes for her, how she's going to ride off into the sunset if that ever does happen. We cover a lot of ground, as we always do, but Jennifer is somebody I've come to respect immensely. She's a powerhouse. She will tell you exactly what she feels about things. We agree on a lot of things, we disagree on a lot of things, but I always know when I'm talking with Jennifer, I'm going to get a real, genuine human who is looking out for the best interest of her and her team. So with that said, I hope you'll enjoy this very broad but intense discussion with Jennifer Stevens. Was it just because of like adrenaline in the moment? Like we were talking in the green room about 2020 being a year that didn't feel that difficult in hindsight. 21 was a different story.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, we had the same experience. I think part of it is just adrenaline. Like this is a new thing.
I think adrenaline and, I almost had like a weird sense of patience. In 2020, I was like, okay, my kids are going to be home for a little while. We're all going to spend some time together. We never shut our life down completely. And I'm so thankful, we always continued to see family. We always continued to take some of the trips that we normally took. Now we were driving maybe instead of flying, but we didn't really shut our lives all the way down. We did for a very short window, call it a month. And then after a month, I'm like, I think we're going to be okay. And so we started opening it back up. And I'm so thankful now because, I lost my mom 18 months ago. I can't imagine if I had given up a year of time, wonderful quality time being with her over what we now know was total crap. I can't imagine if I had allowed that to happen. So I'm glad we didn't shut it down. So I think through 2020, I was kind of like, I don't like this. It's not what I want to be doing. I love to be out and going and doing and building events and building networks and connecting people and making things happen. And so that I missed in 2020, but I kind of was like, okay, we'll hunker down with our family.
Yeah.
But in April of 2020, a friend of my brother's, his 13-year-old son committed suicide. And he left a note saying he was completely hopeless because of COVID. And when that happened, I didn't know the little boy. I know my brother's friend, sorta. But it hit me like a ton of bricks because, I really took a hard look at my kids. And my son was doing, honestly, fine. He plays baseball. He was in his group. He was doing great.
How old were your kids at the time?
My daughter was going into being her freshman, and my son was going to go into being a senior.
Okay.
In high school. And so he was doing okay because, baseball, his life didn't shut down too much. He kept right on going to the baseball field with the same guys. My daughter, on the other hand, is a lot like me. Very, very outgoing, engaged in a million things, and, has a million different friends and a million different groups of people. And that did shut down. And we always used to joke that Ellie cartwheels through life. And all of a sudden, Ellie went cartwheeling. And when that little boy committed suicide, I looked at my husband and I said, we're done. We are done. And so that's when I started reaching out to some of her friends' parents. I said, look, I don't know how you're feeling, but we're opening our world up. I'm more worried about the mental health impact on my kids than I am on anybody getting sick.
This was April?
And this was April. And from then on, we were as open as someone else was willing to be.
Yeah.
And that's why she had to go back. That's why the kids had to go back to school. The kids had to go back to school. I knew they had to go back to school. I knew it was wrong to shut down the schools. I was 100% right. I knew I was 100% right then, and time has proven that I was 100% right.
I remember talking to you that year. I don't remember when that year it happened, but I remember talking to you when you were pretty fired up.
Yeah, I still get fired up.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I was going to tell you this at the onset, but you are one of the few people that I get into a room with that kind of scares the shit out of me a little bit.
I have that reputation with some.
It's hard to explain what it is. It's not an intimidation thing as much as it is like you recognize competence in somebody. When you're in a room with somebody competent,
Yeah.
And you fancy yourself as somebody who wants to be competent.
Right.
When you get into a room with somebody who's like direct and they're purposeful with their time and their attention, and there's not a whole lot of room for fluff, it's like, oh, well, okay. I gotta have my A game on here.
That is me.
I appreciate that about
Yeah,
you.
that is my personality. And it is, I have had people say it is intimidating, and I don't mean to be, or even maybe think that that's the case. But I can see that. I mean, I am a very good mix of my parents, and my parents were pretty intimidating people in their own right. And so I just learned growing up, you know, if you want something, you work for it. If you believe in something, you fight for it. You tell the truth. Yeah, I hate liars. I hate liars. It's probably the thing I have the most disdain for. You know, just own it. And mistakes happen. And, you know, I tell my kids all the time, crow is best eaten warm. I mean,
That's great.
Everybody messes up, right? We're all human. And anyone who says they don't make mistakes is a liar. The key is not, did you mess up? The key is, what did you do to fix it? Did you apologize? Did you own it? And did you move on? If so, bygones.
Yeah.
And then if the person that was, you know, in the situation or whatever can't get over it, well, then so be it. They're not allowing you to be a human. But you gotta own it and move on. But I just, you know, my parents were always very direct. I was raised to be very direct. You know, we talked politics around my kitchen table my whole life. And if you had a position on an issue, you better be ready to defend it. And so I was just, you know, maybe it's forced competence.
Forced competence.
But, you know, I was just taught to think.
Yeah.
Think. And you know, so I have been told I can be intimidating.
Here's what I recognize, though, is that some people fancy themselves the way that you just explained your background. And what resonates to some people is competence, or what would come across as intimidating. Some people try to emulate by being an asshole.
Yeah.
And there's a difference.
Well, I also tell my kids all the time, you can be anything you want, but you cannot be an asshole.
Okay.
And that's literally what I say.
So explain the dividing line then, because we have a situation, I won't go into this in depth because I don't want to blow somebody up publicly to tens of people that will watch this, but we've fired a couple customers in our history.
Sure?
And the one common thread between those customers is that either the person that we're dealing with, who is a fixture at the business and will never leave, is abusive to our people. Or the culture of that company consists of that across the board.
Yeah,
Once we
that's
recognize it's a deal breaker. Once we recognize it's there, we fire them.
It's so hard. I mean, you know, JHL's 20 years old this year, just weird.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
You know, and we've had to consciously uncouple with some clients. And it's always hard because as a small business owner, I'm thinking about paychecks every month, you know, and, you know, knock on wood, we've always made payroll every month. And, you know, I'm looking at the bottom line, you know, so that's tough. But I have a very, very strong faith. And I have found that if I will not be afraid to close the door, God will open another one. And there's times that doors have closed that maybe I haven't wanted to close. And so in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, thank you, because they weren't treating us right. And then there's times that people have been abusive to our team, in which case I have a zero tolerance policy. How you treat anyone on our team is exactly how you treat me. If you wouldn't say it to me, you better not say it to them. And I feel very strongly about that. Now, if we screw up, again, mistakes happen. I'll own that as the boss. It's my job at the end of the day. But if we have to let you go, we have to let you go.
Yeah.
That said, most of our clients have been our clients for a really long time.
We've had some circumstances in the times where we've fired a client, we'll give them a warning shot. And not to say like either you fix this or we'll fire you, but to say,
hey,
maybe you got a blind spot. Like the nature of a blind spot is you don't see it.
Right.
So maybe you just need somebody to pull you aside and be like, did you mean to say that way?
Right.
Because look how that came across to my team.
Right.
And the moment we do that and we recognize that this person actually takes pride in their assholery, right?
Yeah.
We're done. We can't go any further.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it feigns as competence, but it's not. It's like an
Yeah,
insecurity.
no, it's actually an insecurity,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's just like it's like everything in life. The mega rich, very, very kind.
Hmm.
You know, the mega successful, very, very kind. The mega celebrity, historically, the ones I've dealt with, and I've dealt with a lot, very, very kind.
Mm.
The in between, the wannabe.
Mm. Yeah.
That's where you get into the just anything to try to prove relevance, and that usually is just insecurity.
Yeah. You've interfaced with a lot of high profile people through what you do.
Yeah,
Have you ever had a desire to be high profile yourself, or do you like kind of being behind the scenes, being the person that's making things happen but doesn't need to take credit for it? Like when I was doing research on you for this,
it's hard to find.
there's not a whole lot there.
I know.
Which I like. I appreciate that.
It's hard to find. I like being behind the scenes. I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, you should run for office." I did run for office when I was trying to kill somebody one time on our school board. You know, you should run for office. You would be a great whatever, senator, governor, whatever. And I would be good at that. But what I wouldn't be good at is the campaigning.
Because it's self-promotion?
Yeah, because it's self-promotion. And I don't like that. I can tell a story. I can tell someone else's story really, really well. The brand of who they are. Help position them in the community or in whatever sphere of influence they're looking to, you know, impact. I can do that really well. I don't like doing that for me. So I would much rather be behind the scenes. You know, I'm the Olivia Pope, if you will. That's more my role. How am I going to put you on the paper, front page of the paper, or how am I going to keep you off? I enjoy that immensely. And I think the people that I work with are fantastic people that bring a lot of value to the communities or the areas where they're living and serving. And so that's just, I enjoy that so much. But for me, I don't think I would enjoy that. And, you know, again, I'm a lot like my mom. And my mom was a public servant. She served in office for decades.
What did she do?
She was a tax assessor collector, and then she was a county judge.
Okay.
First woman and longest serving county judge in one of the largest counties in Texas. And she was a badass as county judge. And she was a terrible campaigner. How my parents remained married through those elections, I'll never know. But she was a terrible campaigner because she didn't want to self-promote. She just thought, surely people understand what a good job I'll do. And by the way, they did understand what a good job she did until the day she chose to retire. But she was terrible at telling that story.
Well, okay, so I'm going to challenge you on a piece of this then. I have an inkling that the future of public servants serving in the political sphere will have to have that as part of their makeup, the lack of desire to be a self-promoter. You had mentioned being able to recognize truth. You're not somebody that likes liars. Mm-hmm. You want the truth to prevail. I think humans have an innate ability to recognize truth when they see it, and they may not understand why they see it, but I think it's what makes people like Joe Rogan so popular is that whether he's factually accurate or not about things, he's wrong about a lot. He's at least telling you the truth as he knows it. Right. And it comes through when you're listening to him talk. Right. I think we're going to have that expectation of our political leaders from now as into the future, as long as podcasts and YouTube are a thing. I'm not going to vote for somebody that I can't sit and listen to hours of them talking about subjects they have an opinion on.
Well, I hope you're right.
But that doesn't require self-promotion.
It's currently not where we're located, but I hope you're right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it takes, you know, I used to run political campaigns. I ran campaigns for 13 years before I started my business and never lost. And
love that.
Never lost. And you do have to think about when someone files to run for office, they're saying, of all the 26 or however many million Texans we have, I'm the guy that should be elected to this.
Look at me. I'm the right person for this.
And there is some of that. I mean, you have to have a little of that to be willing to do it. So there's that.
Do you have to have some of that?
You gotta have a little of it.
But why? Because our original political leaders, you go back to the founding fathers.
True.
They all wanted to serve their time and go back to their farms.
Home, which is why we absolutely need term limits.
I think you can recognize that you have what it takes to do the job well and
And then
hate the fact that you have to do the job.
I think that's true. I think that's probably President Trump, to be honest.
I served on a advisory board for Austin City Council, and it was what was it called?
That was probably an exercise in insanity.
It was not great. It was I don't remember what it was, Technology and Communications, something like that, Advisory Commission. And I did it for 18 months. I committed to a 2-year term. And I made it 18 months in, and I wanted to claw my hair out every time I went into that room because it was all talking. We're just talking to each other. And so I went to talk to my city council member at the time, Ellen Troxclair, and I went to her office. I booked time with her, and I said, look, I've committed to 2 years of this, and I will serve my 2 years, but what do you want from me beyond that? Because in the 18 months I've served on this commission, this is the first time we're talking, which means that I'm not coming to you with anything, suggestions, recommendations, things we've done as a committee.
Yeah.
And she got up and she shut her door, and she said, I may be blowing her up here, but she said, Tanner, do you know how many boards and commissions there are in the city of Austin? And at the time there was 89. She was like, if 89 commission members were booking time with me to give me recommendations, I wouldn't have time for anything else.
Right.
So I recognized then
Which is fair.
that there's an archetype of a person that has been drawn into political leadership that's the furthest from the kind of person you would want in those roles possible. But because of what it's been, it attracts that kind of grifty, like sort of hide behind your
I don't know. I mean, I think there's, I don't know. I hope we see a shift back to the fundamentals of serving, not because it's a job, not because you need a paycheck. It is called public service. It's supposed to be public service. I mean, there's been articles lately about a city council member who hasn't been bothered to even show up. A number of personal assistants, 6-figure salary. That's not public service.
That's not
That's
service.
self-service.
Yeah.
And I hope we can get away from that and get back to people that really want to give of their time, talent, and treasure in a meaningful way, and then get out of the way. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm currently not running.
Maybe a discussion for a future interview.
Currently not running.
Good. All right. Well, when you do, you can announce it here so that I get to take advantage of your announcement.
That's fair.
All right. So let's talk about 20 years in business. What did you do prior to JHL? And then can you tell the story of like okay, now I'm going to do this on my own?
Yeah.
What led to it?
Well, so I worked in politics. I always loved politics. I went to UT on purpose. I wanted to be close to the Capitol, started interning as fast as I could, graduated early so I could catch a political cycle, and ran political campaigns for 13 years, and I loved it. The last campaign I ran was John Cornyn for United States Senate. I was the first female and the youngest person to ever run a statewide campaign in Texas, 27 years old. And at the end of that campaign, I was pregnant with my son, and was commuting back and forth to DC to his director of transition. I was hiring everybody, opening all the offices around the state, in DC.
While pregnant.
While huge pregnant, back and forth. In fact, my last trip to DC, I got on the plane. There used to be a direct United flight, then I think Continental still. And I got on the plane. I knew all the flight attendants because I went back and forth all the time. And the flight attendant looked at me and she's like, this is it. Like, you can't fly again next week. Now, in my defense, I'm very short and I have no torso. So my son was really big, and so I was huge. So I should have had a couple more weeks of flying, but I do understand why she was very, very nervous to allow me on the plane. But I flew home that week. I was supposed to come. I usually came home on Thursday, Fridays. And that week I came home on a Wednesday, and my son was born premature that Friday. So I cut it pretty tight. And I never went back to DC. So, he was born not dramatically sick, but sick. Needed a little extra time in the hospital, needed a little NICU treatment. And, that changes your perspective very quickly. And so I love Cornyn. He is so smart and so capable, and Texas and the United States are so lucky to have him, quite frankly. But he went from being the center of my world to not being the center of my world, and that's not an easy thing for a staffer and an elected official to go through. And so, very quickly, I'm like, we're gonna hate each other if we don't make a change. So, I was going to be state director, live in Austin. It wasn't going to work. So I left, and what do you do then? I mean, I had worked for him for 7 years, I think, at that point, something like that. And really, my life had been whatever he and his family needed. I was very committed, and so I wasn't sure what to do. And Governor Perry was governor at the time, and a good friend of mine was his chief of staff, and she was like, look, just come work with us. Like, everybody, everything. Just come work with us. And I had previously worked like in some education policy stuff with President Bush way back when he was governor and stuff like that. So I really got to kind of carve my own way, which was fantastic. And I'm forever grateful that, Governor Perry did that, because I was able to have a very flexible schedule at a time when flexible schedules were not cool like they are now. As a new mom, I was able to, I had to have a paycheck. My husband at the time was in graduate school. Like, we were very poor. And so I was able to immediately go to work, have benefits, have a paycheck, and dabble in a lot of things I love. And so, policy, I'm not a policy girl. I'm an inch deep and a mile wide kind of gal. I want to know just enough about things and then move on. But I got to do the things that I really enjoyed. As a part of that, the Office of Economic Development in the state of Texas had been abolished and rolled into the Office of the Governor. And at that time, Texas was $14 billion in the hole with a budget deficit, which is hard to imagine now because we have such a surplus now. But we were $14 billion in the hole. And Governor Perry challenged his staff, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? And one of the many things that he wanted to do was begin to work on economic development and job recruitment. And so as a part of that, a conversation came to be of, well, we should host the president of Mexico, because that is our number one trading partner. And we never had a state visit by the president of Mexico to Texas before. And so I said, well, I'll do that. So it was a perfect use of like everything I love, right? It was a little bit of policy, a whole lot of pomp and circumstance. It was motorcade routes and menu planning and floral. And, oh, by the way, the state doesn't pay for these things, so we had to raise the money. So I raised $2 million to pay for it. And it was just all these logistics of putting all the like, how in the world are we going to get that? When someone says, how in the world are we going to get that done? I like being the answer. And I am the answer. And so it was great. And it was very challenging. I mean, we would get it scheduled, and then TDCJ would execute someone. We execute people in Texas. In Mexico, they don't. So then out of protest, they would cancel the visit. And so then I'd have to call TDCJ, like, when do we have a gap in executions? Because I don't want to plan all this and have it, cancel on me. It was wild, the things you learn,
Yeah.
So, but we did it. And so President Fox at the time, President Calderon was his Secretary of Commerce at the time, and about half the cabinet, and I don't even know, maybe 80 or so Mexican business leaders all came. They were here for a 3-day visit. We did events at the Capitol, the Four Seasons, University of Texas, all sorts of things. And I loved it. And I had a blast. A million logistics and a million, everything, right? Everything. Even the logistics of like every schedule I gave to the Mexican side of the planning committee, I backed everything up by an hour because they're historically an hour late. And so then we only ran about 10, 15 minutes, like everything, right? And it was just like all the ways of thinking about that. And like there's 2 versions of the Mexican national anthem. One is like 20 minutes long. So you always want to request the short version, like stuff like that. Just learning and doing all that. It was a blast. And so when that was over, I'm kind of like, okay, now what? I don't know if I want to just sit and like half do policy and half do this. And so by then my son was 1, my feet were back in state government because I had been Fed focused with Cornyn. And so literally I just was kind of like, hey, Governor, I think I'm going to do some consulting while I look for a job. And he was like, great. Good for you. And we have this economic development project we're thinking about getting going. He said, there's a board. You would have to go meet with the board. I can't guarantee you the work, but they're looking for a consultant. And you've been a part of our economic development, team. And I think you could go meet with them certainly and see. And so I quit my job. And that's how much thought I gave having a business. So I went to open a bank account and they said, "What's your DBA?" I did what anybody does. I called my mom, "What's a DBA?"
What's a DBA?
And so, and then I went to the county clerk's office and they said, "Well, what's the name of your business?" And my initials at the time were JHL. And I sort of signed everything JHL, and everybody sort of, knew me that way. And so I said, "How about JHL?" So that was the strategy behind the name. I mean, it's just embarrassing.
No,
but,
it's great.
especially given what I do now.
Those are the best
just
stories.
The cobbler's children have no shoes. Don't do what I did. So that was, but in my mind, I thought, I'll just consult while I look for, I always thought I wanted to do maybe corporate public affairs or lobbying or whatever, marketing, somewhere in one of those buckets. And so I said, well, I'll just do this while I look for a job. So I always joke I'm still looking for a job.
Still looking 20
years later.
What has surprised you
and
about...
I might still be looking for a job. I don't know.
You kind of get jobs through what you do as a consultant, though, right?
I get a lot of jobs. Yeah. You know what I do love about what we do is the variety.
Yeah.
I mean, on any given day, I'm dealing with, a global public figure, a minutia of a press story in a small town. I'm planning a huge fundraising event. I'm, whatever.
Yeah.
On any day, it's so different. And that I love. It's very left brain and right brain, which I really enjoy. So,
yeah, the variety.
The variety.
It makes it challenging because there's a part of you as an achiever that wants to focus all of your attention on one thing and get that thing done well.
Yes.
But if you're being pulled in all these directions, it's almost impossible to make the time for that. So it requires a level of discipline that you don't.
It requires two things. One, we do everything well. But that requires a couple things. I had to learn how to build the right team. Delegation and not letting great get in the way of good are very important. And that's very difficult for me. I tend to be incredibly anal retentive and attention to detail. And it was hard for me to learn to trust. But I have learned to trust and built a team that I trust very much. And, through trial and error and just continuing to constantly try to mentor, them and learn myself, I think that's why we're able to do the things we do and do well. I also think the discipline of, we don't take a lot of clients. We're very selective. We try to make sure that whatever we're going to work on, we feel like we can bring good value and achieve success. That's hard because sometimes there's shiny big dollars or whatever. But if we're not going to do a good job, we're going to blow up our reputation, and our reputation is all we have.
Yeah.
So we're very, very careful about that.
So Paul and I were just talking before you came in, and we were in my conversation yesterday. Josh brought up this concept of tension, where you're living in this tension between two things that are mutually opposed to each other. You can't do both of them.
Right.
And you never really know where in the spectrum between the two of them you should be living at any point in time. So it requires you to constantly be evaluating, being choosy about the decisions you're making, et cetera.
Right.
So what you're talking about is exactly what we were referencing. And it's that there's two sides of my brain that exist. One is good enough isn't.
Right.
I love that mantra because I like to set high bars for things, especially things that I'm going to put my name on. But the other is perfect is the enemy of done.
100%.
And then at any point, you're constantly having to evaluate what you're doing and decide, okay, is this a thing that we're getting stuck in the weeds, we just need to put it out in the world?
Yep.
Or is this a thing that we're lazy about and not wanting to push it through to 100% completion? How do you weigh that?
Well, I think a couple things to that. I mean, one, I think it depends. If the approach is, just get it out, that is probably a lazy approach, and you're probably not putting out the quality of product that you should. At the same time, one of the things I say to some of the members of my team is, when I ask you what time it is, don't tell me how to make a clock. At a certain point, just give me the answer and get it done. And, it is important. It's interesting because, we're in consulting. So by and large, we sell time and mind share. You can't see those. So if we're not continuing to show value and articulate value, people don't understand why they're paying us. Or as I tell my team, if we have a Picasso in the bathroom, who the hell cares that we have a Picasso? So you have to think and then do. think and then do. Don't do without thinking. Anybody can do that. That's a trained monkey. Nobody needs that. But think and then do. Think and then do. And so, if you let great get in the way of good, at some point you're never doing. You're just thinking, and there's no value to that because people can't see it. Not that there's no value, but people can't see it, so that's hard to see, hard to realize. So there's that. But what you're talking about with that tension, the whole time you were talking, I mean, that is what millennials and or a lot of women would call work-life balance, right? Exact same thing. I've got two opposing things. They're pulling me in two different ways. How do I address both of these? And so people ask me all the time, how do you find work-life balance? And my answer to that question is there is no such thing.
Yeah.
There is no such thing.
You're doing one at the expense of the other always.
Of course. And guess what? That exists even within our own selves, right? I want to be thin, but I love queso. But I love queso, but I want to be thin. So how do I balance those? Sometimes I have queso and sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes if I have queso, I go for a run. It's no different. Work-life balance is whatever you choose at the moment that's best for you. And that is how, I think it's how you have to think about work. And I think it's how you have to think about personal life. And that is the balance. The balance is here, not what someone gives you. And I think the concept of work-life balance, I don't know if it was the way it was taught or the way the media projected it or whatever, this concept that people should be able to do a spin class at 6. I mean, maybe some days you can do spin at 6, but maybe some days you're at your desk till midnight. That's work-life balance.
Yeah.
And they forgot the second part.
Why do you think most people have a tough time with that sort of living in the tension?
Because I think most people are inherently risk averse and tension averse, and they want an easy path. They want to go to step A and then step B. I think it's why a lot of corporations are able to grow to be just full of waste and pork, because people want an org chart. They want a X% raise each year. And not every company's that way, but a lot of them are. I would go cuckoo if I worked in a massive corporation. My husband is always like, you would not make it 12 hours.
Yeah.
You would literally lose your mind. But there's comfort in that for people. And I understand that. Not everybody's the same. I think the reason that people stress about work-life balance is because they don't like the tension of having to make the hard choice.
Yeah.
And they just want the choice made for them.
It requires you to be always paying attention to where you're spending your time, talent, resources.
Yep.
And it also requires that you be honest with yourself when you failed.
Yes.
Because you have to course correct. If you're only eating queso.
And you have to be able to say, I can't do that because my son has a baseball game. And what you're really saying is, you're not important enough for me to do that. I'm doing this instead. And that sounds simple, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And when I was young in business, first starting out, I was an idiot about all of this and would work. I mean, I would work all night long and, just, constant mom guilt that I wasn't a good mom, constant, business guilt that I wasn't doing good in my business. And it's just, I was a mess. And I don't know if for sure age helps. I mean, I just turned 50. Once you hit 50, you don't give a shit about anything. It's fantastic. But, age helps. But, age and just, getting your sea legs under you, time. Once you learn that the rest of the world, they have a kid playing baseball too. They have a mom who's sick too. And once you'll give yourself a minute of grace, right? It's like, sometimes I say, it's not all about you. You're thinking about it like, oh, I'm choosing this instead of that. But the person that you might not be choosing probably has been in the exact same scenario. So take a breath.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, for myself anyway, I'll speak for myself, I struggled with that for a long time. And once I figured out...
With what? Giving yourself grace?
Giving myself grace.
Yeah.
Once I figured out they also have a sick mom, a dog that died, whatever, then I sort of took a breath on that and figured it out a little.
It's kind of that those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind.
100%.
If somebody gets really their feelings hurt because you cancel on them, you probably don't need them in your life.
100%. And, Yes, 100%. Not only you probably don't need them, you don't need them.
Yeah, you're bringing up something that I'm actually going through right now, which is there have been times in my life, I'll say professionally and personally, where I have a pretty high expectation for myself. I'm not real nice to myself always.
Yep.
And I've found that I can also be the kind of person that gives unlimited grace to myself, and then I get lazy. And then I'm not pushing myself to achieve things that I could achieve, and I'm leaving meat on the bone, and I know there's regret in that.
Right.
So it's another one of those tension points. How do you weigh your own desire to achieve, because you're a high achiever, but also recognize, okay, you're beating yourself up here, you need to give yourself grace? Are there hallmarks for that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm great at that still.
Which way do you err typically?
No, I'm an achiever.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people all the time, we're not taking any new clients. I'm talking
Except for
to
this one.
I'm talking to my dad. I'm like, we are full. We can't take anything else. If I do, I'm gonna blow myself, up, because I'm gonna be so tired and overwhelmed. And then the next day I'm like, Dad, we're working on this project. I love a challenge. And, so it's tricky.
It's hard to say
I'll
no
let
to
you know
a
if I
good,
figure that
a good
out.
juicy challenge. It's
hard
hard
to
to
say
say
no to a good juicy challenge. I'll let you know if we figure it out. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's, I just try to use my best judgment. I try not to kill the team. If we're going to take something on, like we have a potential new project now, and the potential client was like, we need a proposal right away, whatever. I said, I've got to talk to my team and be sure we feel comfortable doing this before I even put time into a proposal. And I need a little time to be sure I feel comfortable with that. So that was, 8-10 days ago. If they can't wait 8 or 10 days for me to make a smart choice, both for themselves and for our business, then they're probably not going to be a good client anyway.
Sort of a default no in that circumstance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, people want what they can't have. So it's just like dating.
Yeah, that's
Just
right.
like
It benefits
dating.
you in that
Never
way
make
too.
yourself too available.
Okay, so you mentioned mentorship earlier. It was one of the things I wrote down that I wanted to ask you about. In my experiences with JHL, which is going on 10 years, I remember when we first negotiated with you all, I remember where I was sitting, and it was within the first probably 3 months of us being in business.
Yeah.
I have interacted with the majority of your staff through those years.
Yep.
And you have what I would consider to be an obvious mentor relationship for the ladies that work at JHL.
Very much so.
Who mentors you?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know right now.
Everybody needs a Paul and everybody needs a Timothy.
Yeah. I don't know right now. I mean, I'm very, very close with my family. I always have been. I talk to my dad every day. I used to talk to my mother every day. So them, for sure. My husband. I don't know. I think it depends on the issue. If there's something going on, I have, whatever, a legal struggle. I have friends that I really trust that I know are very smart legal minds. I might talk to them or pick their brain. I think I approach it more that way than sort of like life.
Mentorship by committee.
Yeah, mentorship by committee. I think as it relates to life, I look in. I look inward.
Yeah.
I have a very tight, what would you call it? An introverted extrovert is really what I am. I have a very tight group of friends. I have a very tight circle with my family. I'm close to my pastor. And I look in.
Of all of your characteristics, what'd you get from your mom?
Besides my blue eyes, they both have blue eyes, but thank God I look like my mother. I love my dad, but he's a bald Jewish man, so I'm glad I look like
You don't
my
want
mom.
to be bald Jewish?
My mom's a former model. I'm glad I look like my mom. I probably got my mom. I got my mom's ability to lead. I got my mom's ability to lead and to make compassionate decisions. She was a compassionate leader. And, she would never ask someone to do something she wouldn't do. Never. My parents live on a ranch, and the driveway of the ranch is probably, I don't know, 1/4 mile or something, maybe a little further. from the road, and there was a huge ice storm that hit in Denton County. She's Denton County judge, and so she called the emergency response, gentleman in charge, and said, "Hey, we got to go drive the streets and figure out what's needed and whatever." She said, "Can you get to the ranch?" And she slid on her tush down a solid sheet of ice hill, a quarter of a mile or more, to get into that truck, because she was never going to ask that man to go drive around on those icy roads alone. She was never going to ask him to do something she wouldn't do.
Yeah, it's great.
I would never ask somebody to do something I won't do. And I think I got that from my mom.
It's good leadership.
Yeah.
What'd you get from your dad?
I can be very tough.
Okay.
Very, very direct, very tough, and very decisive. And that's my dad.
Talk to yourself of 20 years ago. You're about to start JHL. Knowing what you know now.
Don't do it. No.
Get out.
Get
quick.
out.
Take that job. What are the things that have surprised you about how far you've come that you would prepare yourself for? Like, yeah, it's going to be a grind, but.
I mean.
What's the upside?
Oh. I'm so blessed, it's ridiculous. I don't even know if I could find the end to the up. The opportunities we have had, the lives we've been able to touch, the people we've been able to help, the big wins that we've had with our clients are so rewarding that I don't even have words for it. I had no idea. I mean, when I started this business, A, I didn't think I was starting a business. B, I thought I was going to do a little bit of political fundraising and maybe some political events. We do not do political fundraising or political events today. So, we are the definition of who moved my cheese. I mean, we have evolved as life has evolved and as I have evolved, which I love about small business. So I don't even know if I could have foreseen the opportunities. But I think, every opportunity we've had, every achievement we've had, every big project we've had, the Jack McConaughey project, right? Those all were made available to us because of a few things. I mean, I had the know-how from politics. Elected officials are no different than a celebrity. I had the know-who from politics. And if you got the know-how and the know-who, you go do it.
Yeah.
And so we were just perfectly situated to do that. And then I learned so much. I should have said a minute ago when you asked about mentors, I should have said Matt, Jack, and Matthew. I have learned so much. And Camilla and Sally, I have learned so much from them in the way that they approach things, in the way they listen, in the questions they ask. I'll go into a meeting and think, I've got every T crossed and I dotted, and I'll get 4 questions right away that I didn't anticipate. And I'm like, teaches me to think more, think differently, look at it this way. And I'm so thankful for that. So, I didn't know those opportunities were coming, and I didn't know what would come out of them. I mean, after year 1, I swore I'd never do it again, and we're about to have 13. So
13?
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, this year will be 13.
Incredible.
Raised over $60 million directly back into the charities. I mean, it's a phenomenal success by any measure.
Can we talk about it a little bit?
Sure.
That's probably a question you get a lot if you get questions.
Sure.
People want to talk about Mac Jack McConaughey.
Yeah.
But how did that
easy,
start?
right?
Where did it come from?
So I had a client at the time that was friends with Mac and Sally. And we were chatting, and he said, Mac was coach at Texas at the time.
This is 13, 14?
This is probably 14, maybe even 15 years ago, because the conversation kind of started, went away, and then came back. And he said, Mac is really getting pulled in 100 directions. If he says yes to the event, he's at an event every night. If he says no to the event, he's the jerk that said no. He really, his friends are getting hit up constantly, how would you approach that? And we were just chatting. And I said, man, he ought to do one thing and do it well.
Do his own event.
Do one thing, do it well. Then his friends know this is the thing that we're doing. And then when somebody calls and they say, will you do this? You don't have to say no. You say, oh man, I'd love to, but we only do this one thing. and give yourself some air cover. Oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. That it kind of fizzled at that. At some point in there, I think he set me up for coffee, and I maybe met Mac and Sally for coffee, something like that. But I remember kind of meeting them a little bit, and I didn't know them, really at all. I mean, I had met them, but didn't know them at all then. Well, fast forward, and unbeknownst to me, this was 6 months, call it. Fast forward, and unbeknownst to me, one night Jack Ingram is up at 2 a.m, as Jack is, and he texts Mac, and he says, "Do you remember the Ben, Willie, Daryl?" Which was a fundraiser many years ago, Ben Crenshaw, Willie Nelson, and Daryl Royal. And it raised money for charities, and it was like a pick and party golf tournament kind of thing. And Mac said, "Well, of course I remember the Ben, Willie, Daryl." And Jack said, "We ought to do that." And Mac said, "Who should be our third?" And Jack said, "Get your boy McConaughey." And Jack and Matthew did not know each other, but of course Mac had a relationship with both of them. And so Mac reached out to Matthew. And then a little bit later, I didn't know all that had happened, but a little bit later, I learned, he had kept that conversation going with that person. And so anyway,
so you
I
had
get a
forgotten
call.
about it then.
I hadn't forgotten. It was in my brain, but
it was a low simmer in the
it
background.
was a low simmer.
Yeah.
It wasn't prevalent. Anyway, I get a call from my client, and he said, "Hey, I want you to come to the office and meet with some people. Remember the deal we talked about Matt? They want to visit with you." So I'm like, okay. And I'm like my usual self. I'm in flip-flops and jeans, normally a ponytail. I pop in, and it's a room, like a conference table full of people. And I'm like, wish I'd have had a heads up, but
Yeah,
okay. And one of them says to me, "Well, why should we hire you?" And I later learned, they had been interviewing people all day. And people are coming in with, vision boards and all sorts of stuff, whipping in
You're
with
in flip-flops.
I'm like 5 minutes late in flip-flops, But I said, well, look, anybody can plan a party. You can hire anybody you want. If you want a fun, big event, I can do that. So can anybody else. No biggie. But if you actually want to raise money, if you actually want to have an event that focuses on the net and not the gross, if you want to work with someone that understands how to put you on the front of the paper or how to keep you off the front of the paper, you have no choice but to work with me, because I'm the only one in town that does it. And I don't know what you want. But if that's what you want, I'm your girl. And if you just want a big fun party, I'm sure any one of us could do a good job. And here we are. That was 13 years ago.
How'd you find out that you were going to get the business?
I think my client called me, and said, "We're going to do this." It was rocky. It was rough at the beginning.
Yeah.
The team, nobody really knew each other. By the time it was actually decided this is happening, it was February 18th, to be precise. And the event was April 6th and 7th.
Oh.
Yeah.
60 days.
Yeah.
Good luck.
60 days. Don't fuck that up, Jennifer.
Yeah.
And it was I was like the dog that caught the car. And, I'm learning people. I'm learning preferences. I'm trying to do the best I can. It was unbelievably difficult.
Did you think you'd get a year 2 after year 1?
The night of the event, I knew it would. Going into the event, I didn't know what would happen. But the night of the event, we had raised enough through sponsorships to basically break even. And going into the event, I thought, we'll see. And we made $900,000 in the live auction. And that was 13 years ago. That's an unheard of amount of money for most charities in Austin today. That was beyond unheard of 13 years ago. Never before been done. And I knew then, I better figure this out, because this is a thing.
Yeah.
This is a thing. And that doesn't mean we didn't have struggles along the way over the years. Of course, we're human. We have personalities, we have preferences, life changes, all these things. But But from year one on, I knew it was going to happen. And it was just a matter of, does the band stay together? Do the players remain the same? Was I going to be committed to them? Were they going to be committed to me? And I guess we were, because 13 years later, they're literally I just can't tell you how much I love those people and have so much respect for them, and am just forever indebted that I've been along for the ride, and I've seen the lives we've impacted and the number of children that literally are alive because of the work of those guys. And I just have a tremendous amount of respect for anybody who gets up every single day and doesn't have to do one single thing. And yet they get up every day and help somebody else. And I just have so much respect for that. So it's been a blessing beyond comprehension.
There's probably a follow-up discussion we could have totally devoted to that topic, that event, because I have so many questions about like how you and I had this conversation after my wife and I got to go to the Stapleton event where Stapleton played. It was like, how the hell do you top what we just experienced?
That's the question I get every year.
That's the only question I want you to answer now, and then we can talk about it later. How do you top
it? I don't know if top is the right way to think about it. I will tell you this. We are not complacent. Nobody, not me, not my team, not Matt, Jack, Matthew, not Camilla, Sally. None of us are complacent. All of us all year long are constantly texting each other. What about this? Did you see that? I had an idea. What do you think about this? Let's try harder. How do we be more creative? How do we be more thoughtful? How do we be more brand awareness? How do we None of us stop thinking about it. And so how do I top it? I don't know. But I'll tell you this, I'm never going to give up on the idea that there's not something we could do just a little bit better. I'm never going to give up on that. And I think that has caused us to look up every year and say, wow. And so every year, Stapleton, Toby Keith, Chris Christopherson, Luke Combs, every year we say, now what?
Yeah.
But every year we find it. So I hope we find it.
That's awesome.
I hope we find it for this year.
Okay, so you had mentioned being along for the ride as part of that event. What will be the deciding factor for you that will tell you it's time for you to get off the ride?
For MJ&M specifically?
For your professional life. Will there come a day where you decide,
I'm struggling with this right now, actually. For MJ&M, I'm in it if they're in it. When they're done, I'm done. I love those guys and I respect them so much. As long as they want to keep doing it, then I want to keep doing it. Even though it is an incredible amount of work.
It's a grind.
But it's a grind.
Yeah.
But it's a blessing.
We have a thing internally where when April comes, we get the whole team together and we say, okay, now listen, all of our customers deserve attention.
However,
but this month, anything JHL,
it better be JHL.
Velvet gloves, please.
Yes, please. I know. My husband calls it the fog. I go into the fog early March and I come out in May. And until then, everyone be warned.
Yeah.
But I love it. When is the ride over professionally? I don't know. I'm struggling with it a little, I think because of losing my mom, suddenly. I don't want to work until I die 4 years later, which is exactly what she did. So I want to be retired, I think. At the same time, I love to work and I love what we do. And I don't really consider it like, it's Monday. Sure, I love a Sunday reading my book, but I don't dread a Monday or a Tuesday. So I'm really struggling with what that looks like because I really enjoy what I do. I don't know if that's a whole second career and maybe I let this go and sort of let go of the making payroll, managing people, that side of things, which is not the most fun. I doubt that, but maybe. Or maybe I don't ever really let it go. Maybe I dial back on events are very physically intense. It's a lot of work. A one-night event is 35,000, 40,000 steps on your step counter, easily. So you do a 2 or 3 day event, you're talking about 100,000 steps in 3 days. It's physically a lot. My back hurts, my knees hurt.
Do you prepare your team for that?
Yeah.
Like, hey, you need to be in shape coming
Yeah.
into this, or you're going to get your ass kicked.
And just smart choices. I
Mm.
mean, we even bring in meals as the event gets closer, like smart choices, take care of your body, vitamins, water, you know, everything, because it is very physically grinding. So at some point that's going to have to dial back. But I don't know if I'll ever let it all the way go.
It'll be when you take on that next career in
But I don't
politics.
want to be like, I don't want people to be like, oh, here comes that weird 80-year-old.
Hang it up. Where everybody's saying, turn the page, and you just don't know it.
So, you know, but I don't know. I think a lot will depend on what happens with my kids.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
My youngest is 18. My son is 21. And then my stepdaughter's 27. So I think a lot will depend on where do they end up. Not, you know, not as they move around in grad school and stuff, but where do they settle? Where do they have a family?
Yeah.
And if none of them are here, then I'm not going to be here either.
In our experience, ours being my wife and I, our parents' career ambitions, futures, everything that they thought was going to happen on a certain timeline changed the moment there was a grandbaby.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm not going to live far from my kids.
What will your grandma name be? That's not my list of questions, but I'm curious. Do you have it picked yet?
I don't know.
Come back to me on that one.
My mom's name is Mama.
Okay.
My son gave me that. If you would have asked me before having kids, do you want to be called Mama? I would have been like, no.
No thanks.
I'm not 400 pounds eating fried chicken, you know.
Yeah.
I would never have said yes to that. But I love being Mama. So I don't know. That'll probably be my first grandchild's choice.
Okay. Yeah, whatever they call you at the time.
Then that'll be just fine.
That's what sticks.
That'll be just fine.
All right. So last question.
Okay.
We talked in the green room about some heavy topics, things that would make you, it would put you in a funk if you dwelled on them. Things that I'd say there's no shortage of things to be pessimistic about. If you go looking for evidence for pessimism, you don't have a tough time finding it.
True.
So in your experience in the world that you live in, what evidence is there for optimism? What makes you optimistic about the future?
Oh gosh. You know, it's funny. I just don't have pessimism in me. You know, I have a lot of Jennifer-isms, as my staff says, and one of them I always say, no is just another path to yes. Like I just don't. I wake up every day. I mean, reasons to be optimistic. I woke up every day. I woke up today. I'm safe. My dogs are healthy. My kids are healthy. My husband's healthy. My home is warm or cool or whatever it needs to be. I have food. I have a car. I mean, I just, at a fundamental level, and I don't know if it's my faith or the way I was raised very, we're very modest. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, and I would have never known it. I mean, we were just raised that every single thing in your life is going to go exactly the way you decide it's going to go. There's a book called The Power of Positive Thinking by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. It's required reading in our family. My dad is a firm believer in it, and he taught all of us. And so I believe that. So I try to wake up every day as positive as I can. Does that mean I don't stew when something goes wrong on a project or, you know, whatever? Of course I stew. Do I stay up all night worrying? Sure, of course, because I care a lot about our business, about our clients, about my employees, but I don't even see a reason for pessimism. I just see an opportunity to maybe things will be a little different tomorrow. Maybe we can do things a little better. You know, even in the political discord that we see now, which, you know, I feel and I see, I still have optimism. I think if you tune out the media and look at real people, I think you'd be shocked by how common most of our values are. I think the media makes a lot of money creating discourse that really doesn't exist. I don't think most people think it's a good idea for a man to play in a little girl's sport. I don't think most people want to watch a man punch a woman in the face on the Olympics. I think that really turned the stomach of most people in the world, quite frankly. I think our shared values are much more common, and I guess that's my reason for optimism. And, you know, this election cycle, I put a Trump sticker on my car. I'm not actually really a Trump fan necessarily, but I have a fundamental fear should Kamala be elected. I just don't think she knows what she's doing. And I think she's a puppet for a machine that doesn't mean well for our country. That's my belief. I put a Trump sticker on my car, and my husband said, "You're going to get killed in Austin, Texas with a Trump sticker on your car." But I also don't care what people think about me. And it's been an interesting thing. I have not been shot the bird. I have not had my car keyed. I have had a lot of thumbs up. I have had a lot of people say, "Boy, you're brave." So I don't know. I think my optimism in business and in my personal life comes from my faith. You know, I read something in I don't know, my husband told me, "Oh, you didn't read that, so-and-so said that," but whatever. I think I read something the other day that said, what did it say? Belief is prayer after it happened. Faith is prayer before it happens. I have faith. So I think that's, for me, from my life, where my optimism comes from. I just think if I sit and stew and think negatively, then I'm probably going to get a negative result.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have faith, and then I'm going to do my best to try to make it happen. And then in the world as a whole, I actually have a lot of faith in people. And if we'll tune out what we're supposed to be thinking and just find our core value, I think we all probably are pretty closely aligned.
I tend to agree with you.
So I hope that's true.
Yeah.
And, you know, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, you know, when Trump ran, you know, he's not everybody's cup of tea. And he wasn't my cup of tea. But I've come to realize that he's a wartime president. Wartime presidents are not rosy. They're not easy to take. But they're there to do a job, and they're there to get a country through something. I think Trump's a wartime president, and I think we're at war for the soul of who we're going to be. And so that's how I feel about that.
That's what makes you optimistic.
That's what makes me optimistic.
Yeah. Jennifer, I've really appreciated knowing you for the last going on a decade now. And what I
Yeah,
told
me
you at the
too.
beginning about being scared of you was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but not all tongue-in-cheek. I appreciate people that when I'm in the room with them, I recognize they're very purposeful with their time. They're intentional about the things that they say. They're unapologetic about things they're convicted about. And they're willing to admit when they're wrong, eat the crow while it's warm.
Yeah.
I think that's great. It's a great approach.
Thank you.
So
I appreciate
I
it.
would really like to have a follow-up discussion one day with you.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it.
We can talk all things Mac Jack or whatever.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's have a follow-up conversation
Yeah.
a little closer to that time.
Let's do it. Let's do it after this year.
After it.
Let's see if we talk Luke Combs.
Okay. Love it. Thanks for making time for this. I
Of course.
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.